What's been on your mind? What have you been thinking about? What's been keeping you up at night? What's been something that has captured your imagination that you just can't let it go? That constant running through your head. What is it? What have you been thinking about? There's so much that we could be thinking about these days. There's so much happening in us and in the world that as we gather on an average Sunday morning, it can be absolutely amazing. It can also be heartbreaking. It can be something that we can't even shake off because there's just something constantly happening all around us. So imagine then, because there's so much of this going on in our personal lives, in our families, in our world, that then we hear Paul speaking to us. And he says, do not be anxious about anything. About anything? Are you serious, Paul, in this very moment? Haven't you seen your Facebook notifications? Haven't you noticed the latest news on your iPhone, Paul? Have you been living under a rock? We knowing that there's just so much to be anxious about. Do not be anxious about anything. These days, we're anxious about everything. But then we remember something. We remember that Paul, as he writes to this community, a community that he loved, a community that he had founded, a community that he had gotten to know over time, he is actually imprisoned. And he is in prison, and he has received a gift from this community while in prison. And he's writing this letter to them as a way of saying thank you for the gift that they have given them. But he also knows something else, that as they are gathering for worship and as they're continuing their life together as a community, they're worried about him. They know that he's going through so much in that very moment. In other words, if someone understands where we are in our most anxious places, it will be someone like Paul. He understood in that very moment as he's writing this letter. He understands what it's like to be in the middle of something that is actually full of possible anxieties and fears. A little bit like our own lives. Oh, we might not be imprisoned like Paul, but we too have our own set of worries. And some of us, our worries overtake us in ways so overwhelming that are constantly in us. And we have this unease that is constant. And so he understands what it's like to be in this constant state of angst. And yet he says to them, deep breath, community. But there's a reason why. There's a reason why he can say rejoice. There's a reason why he can say settle down a bit. There's a reason, and that is because he knows something about this community. Some biblical scholars tell us that this letter of Paul is a letter about friendship. It's a letter about friendship. That there's something in this community that Paul established that had the signs of deep, intimate relationships with one another, of joy and peace and strength and possibility. That this community understood what it was like to support one another through good times and through bad times. And so as he's writing to them, he's encouraging them in a particular way because he knows that it's right there in them. They have something. We've been reading a lot about the loneliness pandemic in our world. We are learning that so many adults in the United States not just feel alone and lonely, but are alone, disconnected from communities. Due to our mobile society, many of us find ourselves away from our natural kinship circles and cannot seem to find new networks of relationships. And even some of us who might have those kinship circles are having trouble maintaining the other necessary intimate relationships of life, like friends. The older we get, the tougher it is to maintain friendships, but also the tougher it is to make new friendships. And added to that, the fact that we tend to hang out with folks just like us, it makes it even more difficult to do that. And yet it is friendships and those kind of intimate relationships that are a key part of flourishing as a human being. You know that so many adults in our world, for example, when they find themselves in a difficult time, they don't have a person as an emergency contact. So we gather together in worship week after week. We, a community called to this place. We gather and we kind of even see one another, and we come into the doors and we settle in our pew. And now, that in itself creates an opportunity. I often look out and see this it almost looks like little neighborhoods among you. No one really owns a pew, but I know better. One of the most interesting and at times scary moments is when a new person comes in and doesn't know the neighborhood and finds themselves sitting in someone else's house. And as a pastor, it scares us a bit because we want everyone to feel welcomed. But we also know your stories, and we actually kind of understand why you find your place in a particular place in the sanctuary. But what I find even more interesting is that often your pewmates, you don't know your pewmates. Often you might know them by name even, or maybe you've seen them, but you haven't really taken the time to develop a deeper relationship with them. I get that some of us really just want to come worship and kind of hide and then go home. I get that. But the reality of it is that the only way that we can find connection and new life is by establishing these deep relationships with one another, these friendships. And it is this network of mutuality that begins to increase the possibilities for us to be in not just in deeper relationships with one another, but in deeper connection to divine life, and actually in a healthier place in our life together, and even in our emotional life. In other words, it is only if we take the time and take the risk of kind of pushing the boundaries and creating new networks of possibility and hope and imagination that we can actually say what Paul tells the Philippians, which is to rejoice. To rejoice. In the midst of the difficulty, to rejoice. In the midst of the struggle, to rejoice. In the midst of the trials, to rejoice. In the midst of the plethora of anxieties that might plague us in one particular moment, we can say, rejoice. I cannot tell you what we would have done, Shannon and I would have done without the church. We've always lived away from our kin. So guess who the grandparents were to our children? Guess who the aunts and uncles were to our children? When they were really little and Shannon sang in the choir and I would, was the pastor, we would see little Lucas bouncing from pew to pew, getting overly spoiled by the people called the church. See? That's the only way that we survived as a family. When one of us got sick or someone was late, we had people in the church who would sometimes go pick them up from school even. That's the only way that we could flourish Even in the recent move to Nebraska, where we knew absolutely no one. But you welcomed us. You are the family we have in Nebraska. And we know that we can pick up the phone and our family will be there. Our friends will be there. There are many people around us who need this network of mutuality. That they're in the midst of difficulties in life and find themselves lonely and afraid. They don't see any hope. And it is then, and only once that network of mutuality is found, that we can say what Paul says, that whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence or if there is anything worthy of praise, to think about these things. The only way that we can go from thinking about anxiety and fear and all the struggles of life to go into thinking about the things of beauty and flourishing and joy and possibility and imagination is if we create these networks of mutuality together. That when one of us is struggling, then the other one lifts the other one up. That's the only way that we can transform our hearts and minds over time into this kind of flourishing for us and for the world. The psalmist knew this. You are my hiding place. You always fill my heart with songs of deliverance whenever I am afraid. I will trust in you. I will trust in you because I see you in the faces of my pewmates. I will trust in you because I see you at the coffee line over cookies. I will trust in you because as my child comes over here on the side and runs towards you, there's someone that's going to hug them and kiss them and send them on their way. I will trust in you because even in my worst moments, I enter this space and I find hope here, possibility here, imagination here, love here. I will trust in you because I've seen your face in my neighbor. I will trust in you because I'm not alone, and I might not have kin relationships like I had in other parts of my life, but I have this community called the church to sustain me and pray for me. Oh, I will trust in you because you've shown up in ways unimaginable as I've gathered with God's people week after week and heard good news proclaimed. I will trust in you because it doesn't matter how difficult this moment is. This community gives me hope and peace and comfort and joy. Oh, I will trust in you because friendship is found here. Thanks be to God.